Horror isn't in the gothic and ghostly, but in the people we're taught to love. Horror is close to home. Have you ever had a friendship that was a little toxic in hindsight? You got really close really fast. People stopped referring to you as an individual and started referring to you as a unit. You spent all your time together, even if you didn't always like them. In fact, sometimes you outright hated them a little. But you couldn't stay away, and neither could they. And you realized that you might even love them a little. There's been a redemption for Jennifer's Body lately. People who derided the movie upon its release are now going back to actually watch it and realizing, wait, this movie rules. And the rest of us are like, yeah, we know. Now apologize to Megan Fox immediately. But while there have been tons of videos explaining the Jennifer's Body renaissance, I feel like there hasn't been enough analysis breaking down what it is that made this movie so iconic in the first place. So today, here on youtube.com/cherrybepsi.edu, we're gonna do just that. My name is Mandeep, and I'll be guiding you through this experience. Take my hand and let's go back, all the way back to high school. Mean Girls broke high school down to its bare essentials for us in 2004. Jocks, preps, Asian nerds, cool Asians, unfriendly black hotties, wannabes, burnouts, and the mean girls, or as they called them in Mean Girls, the plastics. Almost every teen movie since then has included some iteration of these toxic teens, from Jawbreaker, The Princess Diaries, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, Easy A, and so on. The trope has been reimagined, reframed, and diluted to the point of becoming almost unrecognizable. I mean, look at Mean Girls 2. A mistake I think a lot of movies make is thinking that the Mean Girls are nothing more than a 3-person girl group that wears pink and talks different. But the defining trait of the Mean Girls isn't their color coordination or the amount of high-pitched sounds they make at any moment of surprise. It's the toxicity that's specific to teen girls and teen girl friendships. Friendships like these, sweet as the peach and poisonous as the pit, seem to be universal for girls, but especially girls who love other girls. You see, the reason I want to make a video on Jennifer's Body is not just to appreciate this cult classic. It's also because with the redemption of a movie that's so old, the reinvigoration of a fan base, you'll get a lot of hot takes that aren't necessarily hot, that are actually kind of lukewarm, maybe room temperature. I would go so far as to say ice cold takes. You know, like I saw someone say the other day that Jennifer and Needy weren't actually in love. They were supposed to represent a toxic teen friendship, and they were actually in constant competition with one another, always hated each other, and even that one kiss that happens a little bit through the movie, it was supposed to be Jennifer manipulating Needy once again, and I was so shocked at what a terrible idea this was that I had to make a whole video about it. Because, yeah, Jennifer and Needy had kind of a toxic relationship, but that was the point. They're toxic, immature, and they're in love with each other. She got long hair wearing balmain. Look like a model, so I know she kinda selfish. The way she walk, took it straight out of campaign. First I make a move and then she tell me what the next is. Why do so many women who love women experience this phenomenon? Well, in her article titled How Homoeroticism Taught Me About Intimacy and Friendships, author Nicole Bedford describes her experience living in the Republic of Georgia in 2010, a country she describes as unspoiled by Western civilization and culture insofar as the country had never seen a person of color outside of television and movies. As a nation of conservatives via the foundation of Orthodox Christianity, they had very puritanical views about sex. Thus, Western ideas such as sexual liberation didn't really exist over there. Women who had sex outside of marriage were considered tainted and impure. So basically, it was a very sexually repressed society. Because of this, Bedford observed that the men behaved very differently from the men in the West. She states, I found it uncanny how men invaded each other's personal space and were so comfortable showing physical affection to each other, juxtaposed with malignant homophobia. I was perplexed at the outright display of homoeroticism. But homophobia and homoeroticism are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Okay, listen, I know how counterintuitive that sounds, but Bedford explains that it was precisely this rampant homophobia coupled with the intense sexual repression that led to normalized displays of homoeroticism. Basically, they were so sex negative that they kind of started acting a little bit gay with the homies. She states, because they were unable to even be openly affectionate with women in society at the risk of tarnishing the girl's reputation, the men were overly fond of each other. At the time, I found this strange because in my culture, that is not something you see, not even in American culture. Men don't hang all over each other, not in the way that women do with their friends, nor do they kiss each other on the cheek over 3 to 4 times. There was a massive undercurrent of homoeroticism juxtaposed with homophobic behavior. It was a paradox. Bedford goes on to say that these displays of homoeroticism aren't as prevalent in Western society, but I would disagree. Sure, compared to the Orthodox Christian Republic of Georgia, the West is sexually liberated, but we still live in a patriarchal Christian society, and Protestants really hate premarital sex, especially when it's women having it. There is actually a very pervasive culture of girls and women being physically intimate with one another. To the point that I remember that a few years ago, people would even make snide comments about how much more tolerable women were of gay and bisexual women than men were, using these displays of intimacy as proof. But this kind of physical intimacy always had its limits. Women and girls would be fine being physically intimate and touchy with one another, with the unspoken rule that all involved were straight. Non-heterosexual women described experiences of feeling isolated and ostracized. In a study on the lived experiences of queer female youth in high school by Ruth Echeverria, a student interviewed explained the phenomenon, stating, "There's a culture of straight female students saying things like, 'You're gay,' like 'Stop. Don't try to hit on me.'" She stated that it makes her feel so uncomfortable when she knew that someone was ostracizing their gay friend through comments and behaviors that reinforce the "you can stay over there" notion, grounded in a fear of being hit on by queer friends of the same sex. Summarizing, she stated that just because I like the same sex doesn't mean I'm going to be flying around being like, "Oh hey, you're cute," to everyone. Speaking more broadly on the subject, Echeverria asserted, heterosexism results in many queer youth experiencing cognitive, social, and emotional isolation. As a consequence, this population of queer youth are at higher risk of failing classes, having low self-esteem, experiencing social alienation, suffering from mental illnesses such as depression and suicide, and of dropping out of school. There's actually not a lot of research that's been done on queer female youth in particular, with most LGBT-centric research focusing on men and boys, something a few of the researchers I referenced mentioned, so it's hard to say anything conclusive on the subject. From this anecdotal evidence, however, the alienation that girls felt from their heterosexual peers is apparent. There's also something to be said about compulsory heterosexuality. I won't go too far in depth on the subject. I'll leave further reading in the description for you if you're interested. But suffice it to say, girls and women are often pressured socially, culturally, economically, etc., into identifying and perceiving themselves as straight. And there is evidence to show that this might impact LGBT female youth at a more significant rate. In the paper, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Students Perceived Social Support in the High School Environment, the authors wrote, "On the whole, males reported having some awareness of their sexual status in their elementary or middle school years. On the other hand, women came to grips with their sexuality issues during their high school years." So from the aforementioned sources, we can move forward with the assumption that Western society is not as sexually liberated as we might think, and that female sexuality in particular continues to be suppressed, especially in terms of non-straight sexuality. Thus, the aforementioned tendencies for a group of people with such heavily suppressed sexualities to engage in more intimate behaviors with their peers is applicable here. Now, what does this have to do with Jennifer's body? I would argue that Jennifer and Needy share this kind of intimate relationship that blurs the boundaries between friendship and something more. But wait, you might say, doesn't Needy have her boyfriend, Dip? Why would she need a relationship like this with Jennifer? Well, remember what I said about LGBT girls and women often coming to terms with their sexuality much later in life due to compulsory heterosexuality. Needy might be with Dip, but that doesn't mean she's necessarily satisfied with her relationship, romantically or otherwise. Her friendship with Jennifer thus serves as an intense and complicated outlet for Needy to express these buried feelings of love for another girl. And what about Jennifer? Jennifer does show some interest in men in the beginning, but again, it's always superficial and she never pursues any meaningful connection with any of them. She hardly considers Dip a fully fleshed person, let alone the random men at the bar. They're basically a means to an end for her, whether that end being free drinks, money, or pleasure. It's seeking male attention for the sake of validation. Contrast this to her relationship with Needy. The two are best friends, of course, but to outside observers, they're unusually close, even for a pair of best friends. You might say this is because nobody expects a girl as popular as Jennifer to be friends with a stereotypically nerdy girl like Needy. But I actually think this plays into the gay subtext very well. Their relationship inherently subverts the expectations of a setting like this. I mentioned Mean Girls earlier, and again, they laid out the typical high school scene to a T. Unless it's a purposeful infiltration of the hot popular girl clique as Katie infiltrated the Plastics, you'll never really see the groups intermingling in the world of a teen high school movie. But Jennifer and Needy's friendship exists outside this bubble, and it kind of weirds out their peers. They're subverting expectations by virtue of just existing, and it keys you as the audience in that there might be more than meets the eye with these two. Another clue, when Jennifer is sacrificed by the band and the demon possesses her, the first place she goes is not the hospital or back to her own home, but to Needy. Oh well, she eats a poor Serdar just living his life before that. I won't forgive you for that, Diablo Cody. But after that, she goes to Needy, and they share this scene. You've been running round in circles in my head. I got bruises black and purple on my neck. Jennifer holds herself back from biting Needy here, but imagine if she had. We know from the end of the movie that a bite from someone possessed by a demon gives you some of the demon's powers. It isn't really clarified whether or not Needy needs flesh to survive like Jennifer does. I feel like the assumption is no, since she's been in the asylum all the while and there's not really like a reserve of bodies to kill and eat. But if Jennifer had bitten Needy at this point, she would have effectively been drawing her into her world. Needy, who goes through the majority of the movie confused and trying to figure out what is happening to Jennifer, would have understood her in a way that nobody else would. This whole bite and turning thing is, of course, reminiscent of the vampire bite. After a vampire bite, you also get powers and are weirdly bloodthirsty. And the subtext behind vampires has honestly always been pretty gay. You read Dracula and you tell me to my face that Jonathan wasn't a little infatuated with the Count. In their thesis, The Evolution of the Vampire, Other Symbols of Difference from Folklore to Millennial Literature, author Kate Buckley describes the Victorian relationship to the vampire myth. Homosexuality and the exhibition of female sexuality were highly immoral, according to the norms of Victorian society. In Bram Stoker's narrative, Dracula and his vampire brides represent the consequences of sexual deviance and the threat posed by such behavior. The Count symbolically exhibits homosexual behavior through his domination of Jonathan Harker. He refuses his brides the ability to kiss and seduce the young Englishman. Sure, it's being presented as a way to demonize LGBT people, but that's nothing new to Americans. The Motion Picture Production Code, known commonly as the Hays Code, was in effect from 1934 to 1968 and was a set of censorship rules for American cinema that placed numerous restrictions on acceptable behavior to be depicted on screen. This, of course, included depictions of crime, drug use, miscegenation, and sex. For the homosexual side of it, depictions of quote, sexual perversion, unquote, were prohibited, which alluded to basically anything other than white cishet relationships. But filmmakers still wanted LGBT characters in their stories. So instead of outright saying that a character was gay, filmmakers would rely on stereotypes associated with the LGBT community. They would look gender nonconforming, GNC-AF, you could say, and would act in gender nonconforming ways. Gay men acting feminine, gay women acting more masculine, and so on. Sophie Cleghorn uses the 1941 noir film The Maltese Falcon as an example. The book, about a private investigator searching for a stolen treasure, is notable in that an openly gay character attempts to distract the main character. Cleghorn states that for the movie adaptation, Huston could not be so open in his representation of an LGBT character. However, instead, the Hays Code forced Huston to rely on offensive stereotypes and visual subtext. In a movie that is often hyper-masculine, Cairo, the gay character from the book, is extremely feminine in his voice, appearance, and body language. He carries around a distinctive cane that is often used in somewhat phallic contexts. To any audience member paying attention, it would be obvious what Huston was hinting at with his depiction of Cairo. To avoid any subsequent backlash from supporters of the Hays Code, Cairo is explicitly villainized and shown as morally bankrupt. This ultimately became another popular tactic for filmmakers to show LGBT characters without violating the Hays Code. Supporters of the Protection Code proved to be markedly silent when the stereotypically gay character was demonized and condemned. This trend didn't exactly disappear after the Hays Code lapsed, to the extent that it's almost expected for a villain to be queer-coded or gender non-conforming now. This is also why you'll see a lot of villains being adopted by the LGBT community. This does not mean that all villains are queer-coded though, and it also does not mean that all queer-coded villains should be adopted. Some of you just have bad taste. Back to how this relates to vampires. Buckley describes the use of the earlier iterations of the literary vampire as representing fear of those who refuse to assimilate to cultural norms and symbolizing a host of social anxieties about sexual, religious, and cultural nonconformity. We could use this same framework to view Jennifer with a more self-aware twist, of course. With the satanic ritual and the demonic possession, Jennifer has gone from the hot girl of the school, the feminine ideal, arguably, to someone else entirely. But nobody really knows it except her. She is the other, and the only one who even has a hint of it is Needy. Take that as you will. But what about the toxicity? Well, when we talk about the suppression of female sexuality, we have to acknowledge just how complicated the patriarchy is. It isn't solely men enacting their will onto women, it's women internalizing the messages of the patriarchy and policing their peers as well. There's a paper that goes into this in more detail that I'll link, but honestly, I'm not a huge fan of the arguments, so like, you can skip that one if you want to. I mainly mentioned it because I think that Jennifer puts Needy down at times and acts kind of bitchy towards her, partially as an extension of this policing that girls engage in with one another. But her goal isn't to force Needy to be a pure virginal girl, it's mishandled jealousy. Not of Needy, but of Dip. Take the scene before they go to the bar.
It smells like Thai food in here. Have you guys been
You're gross.
You're so gross.
She immediately makes a comment about them doing it, framing it honestly kind of grossly. Honestly, she never really seems to like Dip that much. An in-movie example that Cody might have been drawing to suggest this very thing is the scene where Needy is doing it with Dip, intercut with a scene of Jennifer eating a boy. If you look at the silhouette of her shadow, it parallels Dip's position in the act of doing it and visually connects Needy and Jennifer.
I made you hopeless.
Do I feel a little like this right now? Maybe. But let's talk about the concrete example we have of gayness. The kiss, which occurs after Needy's half-hearted scene with Tristan, right? We all love to talk about the kiss. I've seen people say that this was Jennifer manipulating Needy's confusion and potential crush on Jennifer. Way to play into the predatory lesbian stereotype. But I think this moment is just their latent romantic tension coming to a head. It serves to reinforce the subtext Cody's been laying all along. Jennifer and Needy are two girls with feelings for one another, living in an environment where that wouldn't really be readily accepted, as evidenced by the lesbian comment earlier on in the movie. So instead, they develop a close friendship, sharing intimate moments with one another and lashing out at one another when they can't get what they want. When I was watching the final fight between Jennifer and Needy again, it was striking how the thing that ultimately throws Jennifer the most is when Needy rips the BFF locket off her neck. After everything they've been through, after Jennifer kills Chris or whatever Needy's boyfriend's name is, the thing that makes Jennifer really take pause is when the symbol of their friendship is taken away. You see her realize how far they've fallen apart, how much she's hurt her friend. And I think she actually lets Needy kill her in the end. Her final act of love. I'll finish up with a quote that I think is fitting here. When is a monster not a monster? Oh, when you learn to love it. I feel like the homoeroticism of toxic teen girl friendships in the media is an overlooked part of popular culture, and I think it deserves some more looking into in a broader sense. It's a part of the social fabric of people who grow up as girls and how they're socialized, in American society anyway, but I hope I've done a good job of communicating the specific toxic teen friendship oozing with homoeroticism in Jennifer's body. So what do you think of the analysis? Am I missing any gay moments? Was I pulling everything out of my ass? Let me know. Also, like the video because this took forever, but I'm also really proud of it. And so if we could just hit that algorithm right, would love that. If you want more videos with more spicier takes from me that are too powerful for the main channel, join my Patreon. I made a new tier for it if you want your name to be read out loud at the end of the video. Or I guess for me to read whatever you want me to say at the end of the video within reason. Free speech is for the government, not cherrypepsi.org. Anyway, thank you for watching.
I could slit your throat or rip out both your eyes. You should watch it.